I know from my own experience that a cancer diagnosis can feel overwhelming.
Just 1 minute ago, the ancient towering walls of Buckingham Palace finally cracked under the unbearable, accumulated weight of long-held secrecy. A deeply personal and utterly devastating struggle that King Charles III has carried silently and alone for many years. One he genuinely believed would remain forever locked away inside the opulent, gilded royal apartments, never to see the light of day, has now been exposed in its raw, unfiltered entirety. This revelation did not stem from the usual tabloid leak driven by greed or a disgruntled courtier chasing fleeting headlines and personal gain. Instead, it emerged powerfully from the courageous testimony of a former senior aide, a man who served faithfully for decades and who stood directly in the room on multiple occasions when the monarch's carefully constructed mask slipped completely, revealing the vulnerable, exhausted man beneath the heavy crown in all his raw, unguarded humanity. This is not merely another fleeting royal scandal, the kind that generates clicks for a few days before fading into yesterday's news. This is a truly profound and potentially transformative moment in modern British history. The precise instant when the world is forced to confront the reality that the steady, composed, and dignified monarch they see, waving graciously from the balcony, shaking hands at state functions, and delivering measured speeches, is quietly, painfully breaking inside. At 77 years old, after more than 7 decades of unwavering public duty, relentless protocol, and constant scrutiny, King Charles now stands at a painful crossroads, the intersection of advancing physical decline, profound emotional exhaustion, deep familial fractures that refuse to heal, and an unrelenting, almost crushing sense of royal responsibility that simply refuses to loosen its iron grip on his life. Picture the scene with absolute, vivid clarity, as though you yourself were standing silently in the shadowed corner of the room, holding your breath. It is well past midnight at Buckingham Palace. The long, opulent corridors, lined with priceless historical artworks, gleaming chandeliers, and heavy velvet drapes that have witnessed centuries of power, now lie in an almost eerie, near-total silence. The only sound breaking the stillness is the faint, occasional creak of centuries-old wooden floorboards groaning softly under the weight of a single pair of well-worn royal slippers. In his private study, overlooking the vast, darkened gardens where fountains no longer play and trees stand like silent sentinels, King Charles sits completely alone. The once roaring fire in the grand marble hearth has burned down to nothing more than glowing, flickering embers that cast long, dancing shadows across the richly paneled walls and antique furniture. On the polished mahogany desk in front of him rests just one single sheet of paper, a highly confidential medical report stamped prominently with the royal cipher. This document, which he has kept hidden even from his devoted wife, Queen Camilla, lays out in clinical, uncompromising detail the harsh realities of his health that he can no longer fully deny or ignore. His shoulders, which were once held perfectly ramrod straight through 70 long years of rigorous royal training, endless public engagements, and selfless service to the nation, are now noticeably slumped forward in visible defeat and fatigue. His hands, the very same hands that once signed the solemn coronation oath in Westminster Abbey, that have shaken hands with presidents, prime ministers, and world leaders from every corner of the globe, and that have lovingly planted thousands of trees in environmental initiatives close to his heart, are trembling uncontrollably, as if they can no longer bear even the lightest burden. For the first time in any living memory, the King of the United Kingdom, the symbolic head of the Commonwealth, is crying. These are not the polite, restrained, single tear of a monarch carefully maintaining composure for the ever-present cameras and public gaze. No, these are real, raw, silent, shoulder-shaking sobs that echo softly and hauntingly off the wood-paneled walls, a sound that is both deeply heartbreaking and profoundly painfully human. Multiple independent and highly placed insiders who have enjoyed direct, privileged access to the inner workings of the royal household over the past 2 full decades, credible sources who have never before spoken publicly on such sensitive matters, now confirm that this exact sorrowful scene has unfolded on numerous, repeated occasions, far more times than the British public or the international community could ever possibly imagine. The secret struggle that has consumed King Charles goes significantly deeper and darker than the cancer battle he bravely chose to disclose publicly back in February 2024. While medical updates have indicated that his cancer treatment has made encouraging progress and is reportedly scheduled to be scaled back further during 2026, thanks to timely early intervention and ongoing monitoring, the deeper, more invisible battle continues to rage relentlessly within him. It is an intensely private, invisible war being fought daily between the man he was born and meticulously trained from birth to become the dutiful heir who waited longer than any other in British royal history, and the man he has actually become under the crushing, unrelenting, and often merciless pressure of wearing the crown in our fast-paced, unforgiving modern age of constant digital scrutiny. The confidential medical report that ultimately changed everything arrived quietly and without fanfare in the late autumn of the previous year. According to the explosive, detailed testimony provided by the former senior aide, who served King Charles with genuine loyalty and dedication for more than 20 years, the monarch has been privately and courageously battling a complex dual diagnosis that extends well beyond the cancer diagnosis that was made public. The document clearly reveals an aggressive progression of macular degeneration, the very same hereditary eye condition that gradually and cruelly robbed his beloved mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, of much of her central vision during the final decade of her remarkable reign, now dangerously compounded by a neurological tremor that has grown dramatically more intense and difficult to manage ever since the grand coronation ceremony held in May 2023. The former aide went further, supplying precise timestamps from medical logs, internal palace memos, and private correspondence that align almost perfectly with the king's demanding and highly visible public schedule, leaving virtually no room for reasonable doubt or official denial. In public statements, the palace has consistently spoken only in carefully measured, reassuring terms about minor procedures and successful ongoing treatment. But behind the scenes, the private reality is far more complex, emotionally draining, and physically challenging than anyone outside the immediate circle has been allowed to know. King Charles has reportedly rejected several experimental therapies available abroad that would have required him to step back from public life for an extended period. He has delayed multiple specialist consultations and has stubbornly insisted on maintaining an almost relentless calendar filled with high-profile state visits, formal investitures, garden parties at Buckingham Palace, and numerous other ceremonial duties that demand both physical stamina and mental sharpness. Why would a man now in his late 70s continue to push himself so determinedly and relentlessly, even at obvious risk to his own well-being? The former aide offers a deeply poignant and revealing insight into the king's mindset. Charles is not primarily afraid of death itself. What truly terrifies him is something far more painful and personally devastating: the prospect of becoming the first British monarch in modern recorded history to formally abdicate the throne while still alive. He dreads the harsh judgment of future historians who might one day label him as the king who was forced to hand over the ancient throne to his eldest son simply because his aging body and increasingly weary mind could no longer carry the monumental weight of the crown. After patiently waiting 70 long, often frustrating years as heir apparent, longer than any other figure in the line of succession had ever endured, the mere thought of stepping aside, even partially, feels to him like the ultimate personal and institutional failure of everything he was raised, educated, and trained from childhood to serve and protect with unwavering devotion. The neurological tremor first began to manifest noticeably during private audiences as early as the final months of 2023. in sensitive meetings with foreign ambassadors, or while carefully signing important state papers that would shape national and international policy, Charles would often grip the arms of his ornate chair with such intense force that his knuckles turned visibly white, desperately willing his hands to remain steady and composed. Queen Camilla noticed the troubling signs almost immediately and expressed her quiet but growing concern in private moments. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, was discreetly informed soon afterward. Even Prince Harry, during one of their increasingly rare and emotionally strained telephone conversations before the family rift deepened even further, was reportedly given guarded fragments of the difficult truth. Yet despite these private struggles, the carefully constructed public facade of strength and continuity held remarkably firm until the events of just 1 minute ago shattered that illusion. Let us now travel back thoughtfully to the very origins of this long-hidden internal war so that we can fully grasp its profound emotional, psychological, and historical depth. Charles Philip Arthur George Mountbatten Windsor was never granted the luxury of even a single ordinary day of childhood, free from the expectations of royalty. Born at Buckingham Palace on the 14th of November 1948, the invisible yet incredibly heavy yoke of future kingship was placed upon his small, innocent shoulders from the moment of his very first breath. As a young prince, he quietly watched his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, shoulder the same immense and often lonely burden for a full 70 years with what the world perceived as effortless grace, stoic resolve, and quiet dignity. He waited patiently, some might say painfully, longer than any heir apparent in the entire history of the British monarchy, longer than any monarch in the line of succession had ever been forced to wait in the wings. When the long-awaited moment of ascension finally arrived in the spring of 2023 following his mother's passing, Charles stepped forward onto the world stage with the quiet determination, sense of duty, and thoughtful reflection that the global public had come to expect and respect from him over many decades. Yet behind the closed, heavy doors of Clarence House in the years leading up to the coronation, and later within the more imposing halls of Buckingham Palace itself, the internal emotional and psychological fracture had already begun to form many years earlier, slowly widening under mounting pressures. The former senior aide vividly describes many haunting, sleepless nights when the king would pace restlessly up and down the long, echoing corridors at 3 o'clock in the morning, muttering quietly to himself about the impossible inheritance he had been born into. In rare moments of genuine candor shared with one or two deeply trusted friends outside the immediate royal circle, he confessed that he had never truly felt fully prepared to rule in the harsh, unforgiving spotlight of the social media age, an era in which every subtle gesture, every carefully chosen word, and every visible tremor or moment of fatigue is instantly captured on smartphones, dissected mercilessly by millions of online commentators, and judged within seconds across the globe. The formal cancer diagnosis that was delivered to him in early 2024 only served to widen the existing cracks in his emotional armor. Although treatment has continued steadily into 2025, and recent medical briefings suggest it may be safely reduced further in 2026, the cumulative physical and emotional toll on both his body and his spirit has been immense and unrelenting. The deepest secret now being laid bare for the world to see is that, throughout this period, King Charles has also been fighting a profound and deeply personal crisis of identity, purpose, and self-worth. In his most private and reflective moments, often late at night, when sleep refuses to come, he has questioned whether the slimmed-down, more modern monarchy that he and his son Prince William have actively championed is truly helping to preserve and strengthen the ancient institution, or whether it is quietly and unintentionally dismantling many of the very traditions, rituals, and symbolic elements that once gave the British crown its profound sense of sacred weight, historical continuity, and public reverence. The traditional Christmas gathering held at the Sandringham estate in December 2024 emerged as one of the most painful and defining turning points a moment that was never intended for any outsider's eyes or ears. The immediate royal family assembled as usual for the time-honored walk to church through the crisp winter air and the formal multi-course luncheon that traditionally followed in the grand dining hall. Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, were present and offered warm, composed smiles for the carefully staged official photographs that were later released to the media and the public. In stark contrast, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle remained conspicuously absent once again, their designated seats left symbolically empty at the long table, a silent but powerful statement of the ongoing distance within the family. Prince Andrew hovered somewhat uneasily in the background, resembling a lingering shadow from a previous, more troubled chapter of royal history. King Charles himself sat at the head of the long, elegantly set dining table, making a visible effort to lift his glass in a heartfelt toast to the assembled family members and to the year that lay ahead. Then, without any warning, the neurological tremor returned with sudden and violent intensity. He found himself completely unable to control the shaking. Midway through the meal, he politely excused himself from the table and quietly retreated to a smaller, more private sitting room nearby. Queen Camilla followed closely and concernedly behind him. According to the former aide, who remained stationed just within earshot of the door, what happened in those private moments was the undeniable turning point when the king's long-hidden personal struggle could no longer be concealed, even from those closest to him in the family. Camilla discovered her husband sitting with his head buried deeply in both hands, his voice breaking as he whispered words she had never heard him utter during their long and often challenging relationship. "I am failing them all, Diana, the boys, the country, even you, my dearest." When she gently reached out to offer comfort and reassurance, Charles pushed her hand away softly, not with anger or rejection, but overwhelmed by a sudden, crushing wave of shame and self-doubt, so profound that it seemed to hollow him out emotionally from the inside. "I was always supposed to be the thoughtful bridge, connecting the old world of tradition with the new realities of the 21st century," he told her, his voice thick with raw emotion and regret. "Instead, I fear I have become the fracture that is weakening everything I was meant to strengthen." The aide, standing discreetly outside the closed door, heard every single muffled sob and later committed the heartbreaking, intimate moment to a private journal, entries that have now, unexpectedly, come to public light. This is not the version of King Charles that the public knows, respects, and has grown accustomed to seeing over the decades. The enthusiastic environmentalist monarch happily planting trees and tending to his beloved organic gardens at the Highgrove Estate in Gloucestershire, the gracious host attending grand state banquets in full ceremonial regalia, or the thoughtful speaker delivering passionate, well-researched addresses on critical global issues such as climate change, biodiversity, conservation efforts, and sustainable farming practices. This is instead a very different, far more fragile portrait, a man quietly and painfully unraveling beneath the immense, accumulated weight of royal legacy, chronic and progressing illness, lingering personal regrets from decades past, and an unrelenting, almost superhuman sense of duty and obligation that steadfastly refuses to grant him any meaningful rest or reprieve. The leaked documents that have now surfaced go far beyond simple dry medical charts and clinical data. They also include deeply intimate and revealing excerpts taken directly from King Charles's own private handwritten journals, personal notes that were never, under any circumstances, intended for any eyes other than his own. In one particularly moving entry dated the 12th of October 2024, written only a few short weeks after the remaining official titles and honors of his brother Prince Andrew were formally stripped away amid ongoing controversy, the king reflected with obvious pain, "I have dedicated every single day of my long life to trying to do what I believe is right and honorable." Yet it seems that nearly every significant decision I make only succeeds in tearing my family further apart. Harry will likely never fully forgive me for the choices I have been forced to make. William now carries burdens and responsibilities that I was never strong enough or wise enough to properly prepare him for in advance. And I am painfully aware that I am slowly running out of both time and strength. Another equally poignant and revealing journal entry, this one from January 2025, reads with quiet desperation, "The tremor in my hands grows noticeably worse with each passing week. My eyesight continues to dim and blur at the edges. How much longer can I realistically continue pretending to the world and to myself that this ancient crown still fits me perfectly when the man wearing it beneath all the ceremonial robes and symbols is gradually, inexorably fading away?" These deeply personal and vulnerable words, now made public for the very first time, have sent genuine shockwaves rippling through the corridors of political and media power in London, across the United Kingdom, and far beyond its shores. Many royal commentators and seasoned observers who, for years, openly praised King Charles as the thoughtful, steady, and intellectually engaged hand gently guiding the British monarchy safely into the complexities of the modern era, are now being forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable and unsettling truth. Has the king been deliberately concealing the full, unvarnished extent of both his physical deterioration and his emotional decline, not solely to protect the stability and public image of the ancient institution he leads, but also, on a more personal level, to shield himself from the potentially harsh, unforgiving, and permanent judgment of history itself? Let us now take a careful, honest look at the deep and persistent family fractures that have quietly yet powerfully fueled and intensified this secret personal struggle over time. It is important to recognize that none of this profound pain and internal conflict exists in complete isolation. Each element is interconnected with the others in complex and often painful ways. First and foremost, there is Prince William, the current Prince of Wales and heir apparent, who has been steadily and visibly assuming more and more day-to-day executive responsibility within the royal household with each passing month. Well-placed palace insiders have revealed that William has gently but persistently urged his father on several private occasions to seriously consider establishing a formal regency, a structured, dignified, and constitutionally sound handover of many daily powers and duties, while Charles would continue to remain king in name and title only. Each time the suggestion has been raised, however, Charles has firmly refused. According to the former aide, this refusal stems not purely from personal pride or stubbornness, but from a much deeper, almost primal and existential fear that once he begins to step aside, even in a limited or partial capacity, he risks becoming largely irrelevant, essentially a living ghost who continues to haunt the very historical narrative and institution that he waited an entire lifetime to finally lead. This is the same haunting psychological fear that once tormented his great-uncle, the Duke of Windsor, in the painful years following his own controversial abdication in 1936. Then there is the complicated and still deeply painful relationship with Prince Harry, the younger son, who ultimately chose to walk away from senior royal duties and build a new life overseas. The emotional rift between father and son remains a raw, open wound that stubbornly refuses to heal fully, despite occasional tentative attempts at reconciliation and communication. The former aide has disclosed that Charles maintains a carefully locked and private drawer in his study that contains every single letter, handwritten note, and pausonsir and dice, and private message that Harry has sent to him since the Sussexes officially stepped back from royal life several years ago, on many difficult nights, particularly when the tremor in his hands is at its most severe, and the macular degeneration causes the words on the page to blur and swim before his eyes. The king sits alone and reads these messages over and over again, searching for understanding. One relatively recent communication from Harry reportedly concluded with a simple yet profoundly heartbreaking line. "Dad, please know that I still love you deeply, but I cannot stand by passively any longer and watch you slowly destroy yourself by clinging so tightly to a version of royal duty and obligation that no longer truly fits or serves the man you have become." Charles is said to have sat completely alone in silence for well over an hour after reading those words, allowing his tears to fall freely onto the paper, blurring the ink and mixing with his own complex emotions of love, regret, and sorrow. Queen Camilla, the woman who has stood loyally and steadfastly by his side through every major public scandal, personal heartbreak, and moment of crisis over many years, is widely believed to be the only individual who truly sees the complete, unfiltered, and often painful picture of her husband's inner state. She has pleaded with him on repeated occasions, sometimes with visible emotion, to finally slow down his punishing schedule, to seriously explore advanced medical treatments available overseas, and to allow himself longer, more restorative periods of time at their beloved Highgrove estate in the countryside. There, the air is cleaner and fresher, the daily pace is significantly gentler, and the beautiful organic gardens and grounds that Charles has personally nurtured and developed with passion for decades can offer him a rare and precious sense of peace, purpose, and connection with nature. Yet Charles's consistent recorded reply in his private journals has remained remarkably unwavering and resolute. "If I choose to stop now, my dearest, then I fear the entire institution we both care about so deeply may begin to stop and unravel with me." Even the complicated and often controversial figure of Prince Andrew continues to cast a long, dark, and troubling shadow over the king's private emotional torment. The difficult and emotionally charged decision to formally evict Andrew from the Grand Royal Lodge residence and relocate him instead to a much more modest farmhouse located on the broader Sandringham estate reportedly weighed extremely heavily on Charles's conscience for many long months. He delayed issuing the final necessary order again and again, confiding quietly to one trusted aide during a private conversation. "Regardless of everything that has happened, he remains my brother. And as king, I remain the one who must ultimately carry the heavy burden of shame and responsibility for what has become of him and his place in the family." This deep fraternal sense of guilt and duty has only served to add yet another heavy, painful layer onto the already overwhelming burdens that the king continues to carry day after day. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, the daughters of Prince Andrew, have chosen to maintain their characteristic and consistent public silence throughout these recent turbulent and difficult times. They continue to live their own relatively private lives and fulfill a limited number of royal engagements with the same quiet dignity and composure they have always shown. However, their deliberate restraint and measured silence in public statements, neither strongly defending their father nor offering open vocal support for their uncle the king, has itself become a subtle but telling form of verdict on the serious fractures that continue to run deep and wide through the heart of the House of Windsor. The timing of this sudden and explosive public exposure of the king's private struggles could hardly be more painful, sensitive, or politically awkward for the royal household. With the Easter period rapidly approaching, bringing with it a series of important religious services, ceremonial obligations, and public appearances, and with several high-profile state visits from foreign dignitaries already firmly scheduled for the coming months, the well-oiled palace machine has now shifted abruptly into full emergency operational mode. Senior courtiers and advisors are convening urgent, closed-door meetings at all hours. Prince William is understood to be taking an increasingly prominent and proactive leading role in these sensitive discussions, while continuing to offer quiet, personal support to his father. Catherine, The Princess of Wales, who is still carefully navigating her own ongoing journey of health recovery, is providing steadfast, behind-the-scenes emotional support to her husband, while also keeping a watchful, caring, and protective eye on her father-in-law's well-being. Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, has so far chosen to issue no public statement on the matter. Meanwhile, the broader public reaction across the United Kingdom and internationally is already beginning to gather significant momentum, much like a powerful storm building on the horizon. Social media platforms, news websites, and public forums are currently ablaze with sharply divided opinions, passionate debates, and emotional responses. Some longtime and loyal royal watchers, who have historically defended King Charles as a thoughtful, forward-thinking, and environmentally conscious monarch committed to important causes, are now openly calling for greater compassion, understanding, empathy, and respect for his privacy during this difficult chapter. Others, however, interpret these new revelations as clear and concerning evidence that the ancient, centuries-old British monarchy is struggling and may even be failing to adapt and survive effectively in a fast-changing modern world that increasingly demands radical transparency, accountability, and openness above all else, including tradition and institutional mystique. So what exactly does this seismic and highly personal moment ultimately mean for the long-term future, stability, and public perception of the House of Windsor? In the most private, secure, and confidential corners of the palace, behind layers of security and protocol, four realistic, carefully considered scenarios are already being intensely discussed, modeled, and debated at length by senior advisors, constitutional experts, and key members of the royal inner circle. Scenario 1 involves a path of quiet, gradual, and dignified acceptance. In this approach, King Charles would continue his necessary medical treatment as discreetly as possible, slowly and methodically delegate a growing share of both ceremonial and executive duties to his son Prince William, and gradually allow himself to transition into a respected but largely symbolic and senior advisory role within the family and the institution. Under this model, the slimmed-down version of the monarchy that has been evolving in recent years would continue along its careful, incremental path of modernization without any sudden or dramatic public rupture that could damage its reputation or stability. Scenario 2 represents continued stoic resistance and determination. Here, the king would resolve to push forward determinedly through increasing physical pain, the progressively worsening tremor, the steady decline in his eyesight, and the accumulating emotional and mental exhaustion. He would remain fully committed to reigning actively until his very last breath, mirroring as closely as possible the example set by his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. He would strive to maintain as full and demanding a public schedule as his health realistically permits, continue appearing in public at important events whenever possible, and firmly refuse any formal or structured handover of powers. However, many experienced insiders and medical observers quietly worry that the long-term physical and psychological cost of this approach could eventually prove unsustainable, potentially leading to more serious health complications or a sudden crisis. Scenario 3 centers on the formal establishment of a regency. Before the end of the current summer, a carefully drafted and diplomatically worded official announcement would be made informing the public and the world that Prince William would assume the majority of executive powers and day-to-day responsibilities, while his father, King Charles, would continue to remain king in title and constitutional name only. This transition would be presented thoughtfully to both the British people and the international community as a dignified, responsible, modern, and forward-looking evolution, a sensible bridge to the future, rather than a dramatic or humiliating abdication that could unsettle the institution. Scenario 4, the single possibility that reportedly keeps many senior courtiers and constitutional advisors awake at night with genuine concern, is the option of full and complete abdication. In this scenario, King Charles would step down entirely from the throne, retire primarily to the peace and solitude of his cherished Highgrove estate in the countryside, or perhaps even consider a restorative period of time spent quietly abroad for health and reflection. Prince William would then ascend to the throne and be crowned king while his father is still alive and potentially able to offer private counsel. Historians and legal experts would almost certainly record such an event as unprecedented in modern British royal history. The more sensational tabloid press would likely frame the decision harshly as a form of surrender or defeat. Most significantly, the monarchy as an institution would suddenly be forced to confront a series of fundamental, long-avoided questions concerning continuity, legitimacy, public relevance, and its place in a rapidly changing democratic society. Questions it has successfully managed to sidestep for many centuries through careful precedent and tradition. At the time of this recording, the official palace communications team has so far issued no formal statement or response to the leaked materials and may ultimately choose to maintain a position of dignified silence for as long as strategically possible. However, the documents themselves appear authentic based on multiple corroborating details. The former senior aide has now come forward publicly with supporting evidence that cannot be easily dismissed or explained away. The private journals containing Charles's most intimate reflections do exist, and the tears, those private, raw, and devastating tears shed alone in the quiet, solitary hours of the night when the weight of the crown feels heaviest, have finally been witnessed by the wider world. The long-hidden struggle is no longer a secret. The carefully maintained mask has finally slipped, and the next uncertain, complex, and undoubtedly fascinating chapter in the continuing story of the House of Windsor is beginning to unfold right before our eyes, right now. See you in the next one.